Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ana Prokic-Kostic. I am the Vice President of U.S. Operations and Head of Financial Operations at CBRE, as well as the current board chair of the Membership Council here at the Executives Club of Chicago. On behalf of the Executives Club, thank you for joining us for what promises to be an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation. Before we begin, allow me to thank the members of the Executives Club Board of Directors and Board of Advisors and all of the members of the club in general who are here with us today. The club would also like to thank today's featured sponsor, the Prince Law Firm, as well as the Signature Series season sponsors whose annual support makes excellent programs like this possible. I would like to introduce this afternoon's speaker. Suzy Welch is a distinguished professor at NYU Stern School of Business, a celebrated researcher, and a 3-time New York Times Bestselling author. Her newest book, Becoming You, a proven method for crafting your authentic life and career, is already a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Dr. Welch is also a frequent guest on The Today Show and a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal. We're thrilled to welcome her as she shares her insights on authentic living, rewriting our personal and professional stories, and leading with purpose. Guiding the conversation is Kristen Prince, an employment attorney, business advisor, founder and managing partner of the Prince Law Firm, and a valued member of the Executives Club Board of Advisors. We also encourage your participation in today's discussion via text message. To submit a question, please text EXEC to 22333. That's EXEC to 22333. You'll then get a prompt to submit your question. The limit is 160 characters on the messages, and I don't know how long that is. Now, please join me in warmly welcoming the fantastic Suzy Welch and Kristen Prince.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Suzy, for being here. If you have not read this book yet, I have to say it is fantastic, and basically anybody, whether you are in the career you want or not, it's applicable.
Thank you.
So, what inspired you originally to write Becoming You?
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Suzy. I'm so happy to be here. I did not want to write this book. I definitely did not want to write this book. And I'll tell you the true story, which is I was teaching this class. I was teaching a class called Becoming You, Crafting the Authentic Life You Want and Need at NYU Stern School of Business. And pretty soon after I started teaching that class, students would come up to me, and in fact, the mother of one of my students is in this room. Hi, actually star pupil, okay, and that's the truth, he was fantastic. Students started coming up to me and saying, I want to share this methodology, Professor Welch, with my family, with my partner, with my parents, and when are you going to write a book? And I was like, I'm never writing a book again, okay? I'm done writing books, books are hard. I had a million different reasons not to write a book. Because writing a book, I'm sure there's people in this room who've written books, right? To write a book is to suffer miserably. It's a terrible process, and it's over and it's fabulous. Okay, so, and so my students started asking, and I was like, I'm not writing a book. I don't know what to do. Good luck teaching your parents this methodology. So this went on for a little while. And then my old publisher, who had published Winning and 10-10-10 and the Real Life MBA, came around and said, hey, we're hearing a lot about this Becoming You methodology. How'd you like to write a book? Same thing, no. So this was, I was kind of hearing, write the book, and I had a lot of reasons not to. One of the reasons was I was loving teaching it, and all my time was taken up teaching it. So I was feeling a bit of pressure, and one day I was complaining about this pressure on a walk in the woods with my daughter, Eve. Eve is 30, she's an art therapist, she's an artist by trade. She started as an artist and then became an art therapist. She's a beautiful hippie, okay? And she's just a beautiful hippie, and she's usually like, you should just do what makes you feel good, and I don't know how we're related, okay? I don't know, because she's like she's just a beautiful floating cloud. And we were walking in the woods, and I said, Eve, I'm just getting so much pressure to write the book, and I thought that she was gonna sympathize. And instead, she grabbed me by the arm, and she said, Mom, you've gotta write this book. And I was like, what? You, Eve? And she said, you gotta write it because I see it helping people. And I don't wanna sound like an obnoxious person. She was like, you're helping people, and I said, oh, damn. Okay, That was my last line of defense, was Eve. So I went home and I called my publisher and I said, okay, my last defense has fallen. Eve says I've got to write it. And she was like, thank God for it. So then I wrote it. And here we are. And it was, and I'm gonna stop in a minute, okay? I know. Like an hour later, she finished the answer. It was not terrible to write it. I actually thought that it was going to be very, very hard to write it, but actually there was a great deal of joy in writing it. I knew what I was going to write. I had so many stories. I had done it with, at that point, thousands of people done the methodology. And I actually didn't hate writing it, but I was very happy when it was done, because this is the good part. Okay.
But the book reads like it is becoming you. I mean, you had a very varied career prior to teaching.
Yeah.
So how did that influence you? Because I think sometimes people think they have to have a linear process or a linear career.
No linear careers, not anymore. And no linear lives. No linear lives without people stopping at some point and saying, is this what it was supposed to be, okay? I am the first beta tester of Becoming You, because I had a fulfilling and wonderful life and career up until two things happened. And the main thing that happened was I was working with my husband, the late Jack Welch, and we were working together, and we really had a joint career, writing books and traveling and doing a lot of consulting. And then the way life goes is not always the way you want it to go. And in 2018, Jack got very sick, and I stopped working to care for him through end of life. And I didn't really care about my career for a few years there. I didn't really care about anything except for just being the person I needed to be in that period. And then in March 1st, 2020, he passed away. And I don't know if anybody sort of puts, but 2 weeks later, COVID hit. And I went to the woods with my family. I went to the woods with my 4 children, their spouses, and all of our dogs. So it was a pack of 7 dogs and a lot of people. I have 4 kids. And we went up to the woods. And I think that my thinking was, just look, and I am not the only person in this room who's had a terrible loss. You are not of your right mind. I thought, I'm going to the woods and I'm never coming back. And I don't really care if this pandemic ends or not. I'm not ever leaving the woods. And it's funny because Jack had said to me, you're going to have a life and your life is going to be different and it's going to be swell and I can't wait to watch from heaven and so forth. And I was like, I'm not having a life. But the pandemic ended and my kids went back to their lives. And I was alone up in the woods with all of my dogs. And at that period, I was doing a wacky thing, in retrospect, which was that I was taking in hospice dogs. And, later, I think a wise person observed that this was me sort of reworking my grief over and over again. But I was doing that, and my kids were like, this is dangerous. Mom's up in the woods with a lot of dogs, most of them dying. And I, very fortunately, at that moment got called to come back onto the Today Show. It was a wonderful act of grace, and I came back to the Today Show where I had been working for many years. And on air, we actually have a little video clip of this. On air, Hoda Kotb says to me, Suzy Welch, will you come back to the Today Show? And I was like, yes, because it's like being asked to get married on the Jumbotron, okay? It's like, I'm live on air. What am I gonna say? Actually, Hoda, I have other thoughts. I said, yes, of course. And then in the car ride home, I called my producer and said, look, I'll come on, but I have something else that's calling me. And I think what's calling me is this class. And I had actually already spoken to my kids who were like, Mom, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? And I said, I have this idea about a way to find your purpose. And I'd been working on it in many different ways, really sort of dating from when I had started working for Oprah as a careers columnist, that I had this way to help people discover their purpose. And I did a thing that I look back at it and think, well, what possessed me? But I went to the dean of NYU Business School, and I said, I think I have a class I should have taken in business school. And he said, let's try it as an experiment. And we did, and here we are. It just went from there. It was just sort of, the class started as a little experiment, but if you offer a class called Becoming You to some 20 and 30 somethings,
they all want to take it.
They show up. They definitely show up for that.
Your story just now reminded me of the 4 horsemen in your book. You say that the things that prevent you from really living aligned with your values are these 4 horsemen. And it sounds like for you, the one that really impacted you was life circumstances.
Events, yeah.
Can you describe the other things that
Yeah.
prevent people from?
Yeah, let's talk about the four horsemen for a second. So, of course, the question is, why don't we live our authentic lives? Why don't we live our purpose? Why don't we do it? Sometimes we really know what it is, and sometimes we don't. But what's getting in the way? And this was a question I kept on hearing when I was going forward with this methodology. And in fact, in all the academic literature and all psychological and neurological and social literature, there are really truly four dynamics that explain what stands between us and the lives of our dreams. And because I'm teaching the youth, I've called them the four horsemen, and I put up a slide of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and I've labeled them all starting with E's so that the youth remember them on their exams. So I mean, look, I'm a teacher, right? So, or I am now, which is fabulous. Here they are. The first dynamic that gets in the way of us living our authentic lives is expectations. What we expect of ourselves because of our education or our background, or what we don't expect of ourselves. Like, I could never do that, or I should do that. It's our family's expectations, it's our spouse's expectations, it's our culture's expectations about what people do or don't do. So expectations is a very dangerous dynamic, and I sometimes share with my students this incredible poem where the main character of the poem, it's business school, they don't expect the poems, but whatever, I bring the poems, and where a character just sort of lives his whole life according to family expectations, and then late in his life, he goes to a family party and he gets drunk and he says, I should have married Doreen, who was the true love of his life. And they said, why didn't you? And I mean, sometimes we live by expectations our whole life and no one really cares, okay? And then we think, what, my God, what have I done? To quote the Talking Heads song. So expectations is a big one. The second one is expedience, where we don't live the life we should live because sometimes it's hard. And it's just easier. I mean, I definitely have encountered people who have an incredibly high value of scope, as you do. We'll get to values, I'm sure, in a minute. But have a high value of excitement and stimulation and living a big and a stimulating, exciting, important life, so to speak. And then they find that it's just super hard to get your groceries in to the house living in the city. And they take themselves and they go to the suburbs where things are easier. My students, the way expedience shows up is they have a dream of doing something very entrepreneurial or something in a kind of a far-flung or different kind of industry, and then the recruiters come to campus and they just get on that conveyor belt and they take the first easy job offer. And so expedience is it's a sticky little one because it's the frictionless path. And sometimes living by your values takes courage and a lot of intention. So that's the second one. The third one is economic security. And now I'm going to offend all behavioral economists all over the world because I'm about to sum up their entire field in one sentence. I try not to say this at NYU where my actual colleagues would come and kill me. But basically what behavioral economics says is that we will make decisions based on money, whether money matters to us or not. And that's economic security, and this is why we see people work in jobs and then at age 50 say, okay, I've got the house and the car, they didn't really matter to me anyway. And they're sort of left thinking, I made all these decisions based on economic, and look, you're just being human when you do that, but that can be sometimes it's very real, and economic security is the number one value to you, and power to you, no shade, everyone has a right to their values, but other people make decisions based on that being a value, and it's not. And the last one is the horseman that almost derailed me and has derailed me before in my life and all of us at certain points, and that's events, which is something happens in your life. And it can be something wonderful like a baby arriving, or it can be something like a divorce or a layoff, or in my case, a loss of a spouse. And we start to drift away from our values and our authentic life, and then we don't do the work of fighting to get them back. Because sometimes it is a fight. So those four horsemen, they're very real. And one of the things that is exciting to me is that in the values test that at the Becoming You Labs that we've developed, we look at your 15 values and we tell you the gap between how much you have of that value, and again, there are 15 values, but how much you have of each value and how much you're actually living it. Okay, so you may have a gigantic value of, say, let's say scope again, okay, which is how big a life you want, or how, this is a continuum. I want I want to be Bianca Jagger on the back of a white horse going into Studio 54. I want scope, high scope. Or you can be Is anybody else addicted to TikTok like me? Okay, so TikTok has a whole vertical for low scope, and it goes like this. I like this little life. And then people post pictures of their very twee lives, of like, very, predictable, and like my
Don't
children.
they say mid now?
What?
Very mid.
Yeah, is that what it's called?
I think that's what the young people
Okay, but I mean,
say.
people like, okay, always learning. But I think that, I people who I love and people I'm related to with a great deal of like respect and love. In fact, so I have no value judgment on any of this. Do not want that level of excitement. It's not worth the trade-off of chaos to them. My sister Ellen is in her happy place when she can tell you where she's going to be at this day next year at 2:00, and that is perfect for her. And I think that what we can test for now, because it's a very important data point to have, is how much do you have of this value? Where are you on that continuum? Maybe you're high, but because of one of the four horsemen, you're actually expressing it very little. And that gap is a very important thing to know.
I just got to take this test, and it was very revealing. But you and I were also talking about how many times we interact with people who don't even really know their values. And I think even though that's not one of the four horsemen.
Now let's talk about it. I mean, so in 2009, I wrote a book called 10-10-10 about decision making. And it was a wonderful book, and it had I was working for Oprah at the time, so the book was popular, and when you have that help behind you, it's a wonderful thing. And it's a decision-making system. It's taught in a lot of colleges and universities now. I teach it myself as part of my decision-making class. But the problem with 10-10-10 is it's predicated on you knowing your values. So when the second edition of the book came out, I remember my publisher saying to me, can we have an appendix where people can find out their values? And I was like, uh-oh. So I came up with a test for people to figure out their values, but talk about a blunt instrument. Okay, I'm vaguely embarrassed of it now. The good news is that 10-10-10 is going to be reissued next spring, and I can put all the true values work in it. But I was at that point early in my trajectory of really being focused, and to the point of having my PhD in values expression, the field values expression. So I would say that I went on the road with 10-10-10, and Oprah did a cool thing where she sent all of her columnists on the road in a big bus, and we'd go city to city, and all of the columnists would speak. And then afterwards, people would come up, and I was experiencing every single time that people would come up and say, I love 10-10-10, but I'm not sure I know my values. And I started to think, well, why don't people know their values? Well, here's a couple of reasons. One, where are you ever taught what values are? Not in high school, because you're too busy learning the volume of a cylinder, which is really going to come in handy. And not in college, where you're like learning about, as I did, like Bolivian history, which I loved Latin American history, and I learned about that, but I didn't learn what values were. And in fact, like most people, I assumed that values were virtues. Okay, that things like kindness and integrity were values. And those are wonderful things, but they're actually virtues. Values are entirely different. It's almost like the academics are secretly over here whispering what values are, and they're not telling the rest of the world. And when I finally got into the classroom to teach the Becoming You methodology, which helps you find your life of purpose, you have to know your values. And so I mean, we have a hilarious photograph of me up in front of the class with an abacus, trying to explain to my students that every value existed on a continuum, and that at that point I was using a values inventory called the Schwartz Values Inventory, which is the grand old inventory, which I've since had the audacity to revise, and there's a new inventory called the Welch-Bristol Inventory. But I was up there like moving abacus beads around. And they'd be like, okay, Professor Welch. So I came up with like 8 different exercises, which are all in the book, to help you identify your values. But eventually I just said, I can't stand it anymore. I'm creating the digital tool, which you've taken, that helps you find out what your values are, ranked 1 to 15, and what the gap is on each one. In the meantime, I thought, I want to just find out how many people know what their values are. So I got together with the NYU research department. They did not know what to hit them. When I became a full professor and I finally had access to all of NYU's research capacity, they were like, who is this broad? Get her out of our face. I mean, I was in there every day, okay? They were like, oh, she's back. Because I wanted to find out some stuff, and I had been waiting a long time to find it out. So I did a bunch of research to find out how many people could actually define a value. Guess what that was? And that was really low, tiny. People, we had a wide berth for what it was. If they even named one value, we were very happy, 17%. And then when you asked people to name their values, people who actually could name values and not aptitudes or personality traits or virtues, 7%.
Yeah, okay, so when I read your book, I did then Google, because I was like, oh, 15 values. And some of them I didn't ever consider
That's
as
right.
values.
Yeah.
And I will say, the Google does mislead you, because most of the things out there have lists of virtues. And I think sometimes we don't really consider like wealth a value, right? I mean, some of these I never heard of.
Scope or radius
Yeah.
or holderism. I know. I feel like, why are the academics keeping it hidden? I mean, it's, there are these values that can describe every aspect of what galvanizes our actions and decisions. So for instance, let's take some of the values that people are not very familiar with, but are very well established as part of all the research. So there's a value, every values inventory has different names for these, and one of the reasons I revised the values inventory that most people use, and I'm waiting for the professor who created this in 1990, his name is Shalom Schwartz, to come and find me and kill me. But I would say that there's a value that is, that he calls aesthetics, and that's fine, but it sort of makes people a little bit defensive, and so does the value of, there's a well-defined value of self-care, and it's, in most values inventory, it's referred to as hedonism.
Who doesn't like hedonism?
I mean, I think it's like very judgy. I have a different name for it. The value of the desire for self-care, pleasure, and flourishing we call eudaimonia. And it's very interesting. There's very interesting generational differences for where that is. With my Gen Z students, about 65% of them have that as their number one value. And oldsters like myself don't have that quite as high. And you had it at like,
I had it in my top 5.
in top 5,
Yes.
but that's, I think that's healthy. But again, no shade, I don't care where you have it. For me, it's very low because I have such other higher values around work and so forth. So, but it's all good.
So you spend most of your time teaching grad students, as we discussed, but how do you see the methodology and the book impacting people at different stages of their career?
I would say it's about half and half what age groups I teach it to, because I do teach it in workshops on the NYU campus that are open enrollment, and those classes tend to be people 40 and over, 40s, 50s, I mean, and even the oldest person who's taken one of those classes has been 78. Because people have the question at every point in their life, and sometimes young people are a lot more sure about what they want to do with their lives than somebody who's 40 and has sort of been around the block a few times and says, wait a minute, something is not right, or maybe this isn't exactly it, or in some cases, wait, my industry is going away, something else is going to have to come into its place. Or I'm done with this part of my life. It was great, but I have X, Y, and Z skills and knowledge now, and I want to do something else. So the methodology itself, and just briefly, the Becoming You methodology, which is designed to help you identify what we call your area of transcendence, another word for purpose. And it does it in 13 steps, but it's roughly this. It excavates your values very, very carefully, tells you here's your values. It then helps you identify your aptitudes, and these are your cognitive aptitudes, the big 8. Are you a generalist or a specialist? Are you a brainstormer or an idea contributor? Are you a future focuser or a present focuser? These 8 big ones. And then I consider part of your aptitudes your personality, because we all know that you can be great at a job because of your personality, or you can be terrible at a job because of your personality. So I can include in the methodology understanding of how the world experiences your personality. That's part of it. That's the hard part for a lot of people. And then the third part is an identification of your economically viable interests. What industries call you intellectually or emotionally, but also can pay you what your affluence value would suggest. So it's 3 big data sets. We excavate them, hopefully in a fun way, and then from that you look at where the overlap is, and that's your purpose. And so the methodology is kind of age agnostic, because it doesn't make any difference where you are. If you've worked 40 years or if you've not worked ever before. Your values are your values. Your aptitudes are set from the age of 15, according to most social scientists. I've not done that research, but I believe that research. And your interests are your interests. I mean, so it's sort of age agnostic.
Okay, I have a question, but first somebody from the audience wants to know,
Yeah.
and I hope we can tell them, because I asked
Yeah.
this question too. How do we access the digital tool to determine values?
Go to my website, SuzyWelch.com. There should be a button on the front that says Take the Values Quiz, okay? It should be right there. If not, you go into the website under Resources, it should be there. So and I think you can even go to valuesbridge.com, valuesbridge.com and take that, yeah.
It's extremely revealing and fun.
I mean, it is like, I was saying to you before, you took it in a very obnoxious way. Your mind's about to be blown. But I only could say that because I've seen people take it and be like, oh my God, I knew that was my value. Look at this variance. It's 98%. I have this value very, very strongly, and I'm not living it at all. I will say that one of the dreadful things maybe it didn't seem dreadful at the time, is when I was first testing this tool, its first iteration was on it was on Qualtrics. Most of you are familiar with this kind of, and I was doing it at first, testing this tool, and I needed a lot of people in focus groups to take it so I could watch them taking it, I could adjust it, the way these things go. So the way I did this was I started having dinner parties for my incredible colleagues in the M&O department, in the management and organizations department. And I'd say, come on over for dinner. And they'd come with their spouses, and we'd all sit around, be 18, 20 of us. And then after dessert, I would say, by the way, would everybody mind just taking a quick test? And they'd be like, okay. And by that time, they were all liquored up enough. And they all took the test, okay? And so a funny thing happened was I started to see couples taking it next to each other. So one member of the couple would get their values back, and they would have a variance, an overall variance that would show that they were absolutely very close to living their purpose, as you are. We call these thresholders. And then their partner, their spouse, would be sitting next to them, and their variance would have them like as a discordant or incongruent, somebody who's very far away. And I would look over, and the spouses would be looking at each other, and there would be this very awkward silence. And I would say, okay, any limoncello in this house or whatever, just let's move it along. And I realized a couple of things. I realized, A, do not do this with couples unless you're ready to deal with the fallout. But the other was that we live our values in relationship. We live our values in relationship with our families, with our companies. I mean, one of the very interesting applications of the tool is, I have done this recently with a couple of companies, I did it at Google and so forth, is that individuals take this and then their team takes it, or their company has their values, because companies have values too, as we all know, and they compare. So it's the new version of the tool is if you take it and somebody takes it and you check a box, your values will come up right next to each other and show you how aligned they are, how much conflict there is. And you'll see that as well, because we do live our values oftentimes in relationship with those who really matter to us.
You brought up your colleagues, and there is a colleague that you have who's written a bunch saying, don't follow your passion.
Yeah.
That's the worst advice ever.
That's my friend Scott Galloway, yes. Yeah.
And I really think people could be confused that maybe you saying, live your values as live your passion or work your passion. But how is it different?
Okay, thank you for such a great question. By the way, I love and respect Scott Galloway very much. And I think we are very aligned in that I don't think you should live your passion, that those are your values. But if you're not very good at them, okay, so that's your aptitudes. I mean, becoming you has 3 parts. I am the least woo-woo girl in the world, okay? I can't stand the live your passion stuff because it doesn't take into account that you could be terrible at your passion, okay? Like, you want to be a rock star, but you can't sing, okay?
That's
it's
me.
like, you
I would
gotta
love to be a rock
me
star.
too. I mean, like, oh yeah, but like when I'm in church, people literally turn around and tell me to stop singing. I mean, it's so bad. It's like, in the nicest environment in the world, they'll be like, you're killing us here. I mean, you've got to be good at what so I think know your values, and you want to live as closely to your values, but when it comes to work and your career, go where your values and your aptitudes and your interests overlap. And so I'm with them on that. Look, it's a beautiful thing when your values and your aptitudes and your interest, like when your aptitudes completely match your values. And that happens. A lot of people who are in social justice have that. Okay, so I just recently did a talk in Philadelphia, and it was all the nonprofit leaders there, and they all took the test, and many of them have as their top values radius, as you do, which is if your life was a bomb and it dropped on the earth, how big a crater would you like to leave? How much systemic change, okay, would you like to leave in the world? But that's very different from the value of non-SIBI, which means not for oneself, which is the instinct, the impulse, the desire, the motivation to help people on a much more personal and intimate level. Like if you're a person whose neighbor gets sick, are you the first person to bring the casserole? Okay, or do you want to end world hunger? These are two different ways of helping, okay, and neither better or worse. But when I was speaking to these people who were running nonprofits in Philadelphia, the room was almost entirely people who had as number one either radius or non-SIBI. And it's interesting, the people who had non-SIBI were sort of people who were kind of in intimate community, like running community gardens, and the radius people who were doing like much more systemic kind of change. But whatever, sometimes you get people who are number one radius, number two non-SIBI, it's fine. The interesting thing is with many of them, with their aptitudes, they were naturally good at what that work takes, and they're in the right place, and they are living their passion, and that's great. But if you do not have the skills to work in say you don't like raising money, and say you're bad at raising money, should you be in those worlds? Because those worlds require you constantly raising money.
Right. So we have a couple audience questions.
Yes, great.
And one of them, what if you find out your values don't seem worthy enough? Can you change your values or just your behavior?
Okay, what a great question. I'm trying to think if there's a value that's not worthy. I don't think it's true. I think that all values, they're you. And I can't think of a value that would not be worthy. They are who you are. My bigger question is, sometimes what happens is one of the values is called, it's very self-explanatory, it's called family centrism. It's how much family is the organizing principle of your life. And sometimes people take the test and then, oops, they find family centrism is like 7 or 8, and they feel uncomfortable with it, and they want to move it up. And my first question is, well, why do you want to move it up? Is that about expectations? Is that about something? Is that about guilt? What about just understanding that maybe what you need to do is communicate better with other people around you about, it doesn't mean you don't love your family. My family centrism is around there. I would give everything to my children. I love my children, but like literally, I could be right now at home. My kids are in their 30s, but for some reason they just need me more and more. I mean, why does that happen? You think they're going to go away, but they go away and then they come right back, and they're just in your face every minute. And so, and I think that it's about understanding yourself and explaining yourself. So can you change your values? I think you can change how much you're expressing them, but I don't think there's any unworthy value. I think it's who you are, and you need to make peace with it more than anything else.
I love that about your book too, because I personally had I could sense myself having some self-judgment about some of the values, and not just self-judgment, but external judgment as well.
Right.
And you were so open about, these are just values. There's none that are better than the other. You might value, beholderism.
So let's talk about beholderism, because it's a perfect example. I always say there should be a support group for people who find out beholderism is their number one value. Beholderism, one of the oldest values established, and one that's called aesthetics by the other inventories, is how much you care about how things look. Your home, your stuff, and you. Okay, and we all know people who I have high beholderism. My father was an architect, my mom was an artist. I love homes. I care a lot about what my environment feels like. Beholderism possibly is a proxy for the desire for harmony, because we can't control very many things in this world, but we can control our environments and what we look like. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes we just want to look fine, okay? And so, but it is what it is. If you're not hurting anybody, who cares? And that's a big if. Okay, if you're not hurting anybody, embrace your beholderism. I had a woman come to one of my workshops. I teach the whole methodology in 3 days, and I've got to stop doing it in 1 day, because that's quite the day, in these workshops at NYU. And she came, and I could see when she got her results back on the test, she was kind of twitching in her seat, and I thought, oh, there's somebody who just found out that it's beholderism is number one. And at the break, she came up to me and she was like, I cannot believe I'm so shallow. Beholderism is number one, but I know it's true. And I was like, I think it's cool. Like, she happens to be a beauty influencer, so like, so what? I mean, it is beholderism, and then she's become the biggest advocate for it, and now she explains herself that way. It's a way, you don't have to make any excuses for why you want to go to the gym or why your house matters so much. This is a value. You're not hurting anybody, and go for it.
So someone from the audience, which I think you covered a bit, but they asked, do our values change with time and experience?
Okay. This is the billion-dollar question, okay? And no one knows, all right? So social science is very clear on aptitudes. Our cognitive and intellectual aptitudes are set by 15. There's been a lot. This is research that's been repeated again and again and confirmed. But nobody knows about values. And so I think with the Values Bridge, in 5 years, I'll be able to answer that question. I will actually have the data, and I'm gonna have a party. I'm gonna be so excited. I mean, I think that, but I do have probably, I probably have 10 to 20,000 pieces of empirical data on this because I taught Becoming You to that many people. And here's my theory. It's a theory. I can't wait to have the data. The theory is that I think our values are pretty set in our early 20s, and what changes is how much we express them or repress them. That's what I think. Okay? And I think that you may have a middling value of family centrism, and then the babies show up. And you just amp it up as much. But then once the babies are gone, bye-bye, you let it go, okay? And it goes down to its rightful place, all right? And so I do think we can pull the levers, but I think our values, because I'm gonna nerd out on you for 12 seconds, okay? There's two fields in values academically, and one is values formation. And this is how we came by our values. Is it family? Is it personality? Is it experience? Is it trauma? And this is what neuroscientists study, it's what psychologists study, it's what you talk about with your therapist, is how come you have the values you have. And I am not in that field. I think that field's fascinating, I'm interested in it, but I'm in values expression, which is how much of a value you have and how much you're actually living it. That's a whole different field. And so I think that a lot of times people talk about, they mix these up and they'll say, well, I came by this value this way and then this happened. I'm like, leave that for the formation people. I'm over here with how much you've got right now, okay? And I want to deal in the present. Becoming You is a tool to get you to your purpose. It's not a psychological study. This is your values, this is how much you're living them. Let's get you to the best, most purposeful life as soon as possible. That's my job.
Okay, so let's switch up. We talked a lot about values. Let's switch to the attributes, because I also think people don't really recognize their own attributes. In fact, I called both my husband and one of my law partners and was like, what are my best skills and attributes? They both gave the same answer, so it was
all right. That's good. That's great.
But there was a story in the book about a woman who was in a great operational role and then got elevated to an executive director role. Yeah. And it was interesting because I think the book really says it's okay to not be a leader, and most people just assume that's it. You go into the workforce to become a leader.
Yeah.
So how do you help people figure out maybe that's not what they should be doing?
All right, so there's a section of the book is completely about identifying what your actual aptitudes are. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to do that. All the tests are in the book. And there's one test I recommend you take, but it's a little pricey. It's $40, so take it if you want. It's called U-Science. It's very good at identifying. But I have a version of it in the book that's free. So we have 8 big cognitive aptitudes, and they're how we are actually wired to process information and solve problems. And these, I mentioned them briefly before. They're like, are you a generalist? You want one fact on everything, or are you a specialist? You got to know everything about one thing. You like to dig deep, deep, deep. These are 2 different wirings. This data would show us that almost no one is a blend of both. Almost everybody is at one end of that continuum. And what's very painful is when we're a generalist in a specialist job, or when or vice versa, and many stories of this with my students. Or another is, are we a brainstormer, which is that we just can come up with ideas. We have very little ego editing of our ideas, and we just brainstorm. Or are we a person who comes up with one kind of formed idea and sits on it before we offer it? There's different jobs for these different kinds of cognitive aptitudes. And I highly urge you, if you don't know where you are, if nothing else, do this part of the book and figure out what your 8 cognitive aptitudes are. They really make the difference for what kind of work is right. And I do tell this story about a person who was fantastic. She was a process supporter. She kept the pipes in their grooves. She was incredibly good at, she was sort of like just an incredibly good process person. Everything got done because of her. And then she was in a nonprofit organization, and they thought, won't this be wonderful? Let's promote her to a role of a executive leader. And she was like drowning, and she was like, I can't take it. None of this work. She was not an inductive reasoner. She was not a sequential thinker. All the things she did were about process, and she demoted herself. And she said, it's going to be so embarrassing. I said, for 5 minutes, and then everybody will be so happy for you, and that's what happened. So that's one piece of understanding your aptitudes. There's 2 more pieces. I'll go over them very briefly. The other is about personality. Okay, I really think personality is a huge part of whether or not we can succeed in a job, but here's the gigantic problem. It's really hard with my students, and that is that breaking this terrible news to them, which is that our personality is not the words we use to describe ourselves, okay, necessarily. Our personality is how the world experiences us. Because if I was asking you your personality, I'm kind, I'm loyal, I'm generous, I'm a very good listener, okay? Well, let's find out what the world thinks. All right, and this is the work of our life. By the time we're around 60, we know how the world is experiencing us, but we get knocked around quite a bit waiting to find that out. And so, look, I developed a test because I was so frustrated with this that actually measures your self-awareness based on how good are you with people, how good are your ideas, how original are they, and how good are you at execution. All right, it takes 5 minutes to do this test. 40 people give you feedback anonymously, gets aggregated, and then people get their results back, and they're like, okay, I thought it was great with people, apparently not. And we need to know that about ourselves because we can fix all those things, but let's say we find out we're spectacular at ideas and we're in a client-facing role. We need to move ourselves over to a job that rewards us for our ideas. So I think it's about fit again and alignment. The last thing I'll say is this. We are born into a world that canonizes leadership, that tells you, you should be a leader. Leader's good, non-leader's bad, okay? Like your kid is in 7th grade and the thing you're sitting there waiting for in the parent-teacher conference is, Johnny is a leader. And you're like, yes, I did it. Okay, and I had this incredible eureka because I remember when my 3rd child, he's my 2nd son, was applying to colleges, and he was on the swim team. And I said to him, you've got to be captain of the swim team. You've got to be captain of the swim team. I was just such a good mother. I was like, oh. And he said, I don't want to be captain. And I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, I don't want to lead. I don't want the responsibility. And I was like, what's wrong with you? And it was a long journey from there. Guess what? I forced him to be captain, okay? I was like, whatever you do, you become captain of that team, son, and he did. I mean, he was a dutiful son. He's now completely happy and free, and he got free of me, and he's got a spectacular wife, and I'm happy to outsource him to her. So I'd say that, admit it, that's what it is when they get married. My students are MBAs, and they come in with this socialization that you got to become a leader. But not all of them want to be leaders. And sometimes I just sort of casually in class say, how many of you have main character energy? And how many of you have supporting actor energy? And I just sort of ask it casually, and I'm telling you, it's 50-50. Okay, but they are told.
Oh, so they admit it.
They admit it. They admit it because we're kind of casual in this, like everybody getting to know each other. But if you were to ask them in an interview, they would tell you, I want to be a leader, and the way the stripes on the shoulder, and the way the hierarchy of the job you get is how many people you're managing. When I was at HBS, Steve, I don't know if they did this in your section. On the first day when you go around and introduce yourself, you would say your name, and I bet they don't do this anymore, where you were from, and how many people you had managed. Yeah. No, okay. And I remember thinking, I had managed 12 people before I'd gotten to business school, and there were people saying 300 people. And I was like, oh, and we all would go, oh. Okay, so this still goes on, okay, that leaders are good. And so I actually think that leadership is very hard and complicated. It takes certain personality traits and skills, and not everybody wants it or is equipped for it. And there's no good or bad about that. There's only good or bad for you. And so I actually developed a test. It's absolutely free on my website. It's called Career Traits Compass. And it tests you on 4 different bundles of personality traits that go with being a leader in today's environment, meaning incredibly fast change, huge ambiguity, no boundaries whatsoever, and so forth. And it tests you on these 4 bundles of personalities. And I can't tell you, I'll give this to all my students in both my management class and in my Becoming You class, and what the relief students feel when they do not score off the charts on leadership. They say things like this: I knew it. I knew it. I didn't ever want to do it. And other people get their scores and they're like, okay, how do I fix this trait? And I say, okay, here's the ways you can. Some of them, like some you can't. Stamina, generally, you can't really adjust, but there's other things you can. You can get better at making decisions in short periods of time. But I do think that when we're assessing our aptitudes, we need to know where we are on the leader to individual contributor continuum. No good or bad, just good or bad for your purpose. We need to know how the world experiences our personality, and we need to know how we're cognitively, what our cognitive aptitudes are.
One of the things you recommend for understanding your aptitudes is a 360 review. But most people don't have access to that except in their workplace.
Yeah, they got to take mine. That's why I created mine. I mean, creating digital tools was definitely not on my bingo card. I don't know how it happened to me, but except for frustration, I was teaching Becoming You in the wild. So when I teach Becoming You at NYU, my students take a very expensive, like it's $150, it takes 5 weeks to do, and we buy it from a vendor that serves universities and corporations. When I'm out there teaching Becoming You in the wild, in workshops or when I'm on the road, and people say, yeah, I want a 360. So about 3 years ago, I thought, this tool must
do people
exist.
Really say, yeah, I want a 360?
Yeah, they do. They say, I want to know, Suzy, they say, I want to know how the world experiences me. And I thought, okay, this tool must exist. And so I started looking for it, and I was like, where is it? I need a cheap, fast tool that does this. And I drove everyone who knew me crazy because I tried all the tools that were out there, and I was like, time to evaluate me again. And they were not cheap enough and fast enough. And so finally, I developed it. It's called Pi 360. It costs $12, and you can get up to 40 people to anonymously tell you how you are on your relationships with people, your ideas, and your execution. How well you actually get things done, totally anonymous. And then it asks you how you think you are on those things, and you'll get a self-awareness score. Because it's necessary if you want to do this. I mean, the other alternative is very old-fashioned. Go around and ask people to tell you to your face how you are on those things. Good luck with that. Yeah.
So how often do you see people are self-aware? Like that people's responses about themselves are the same as...
I'm about to do a white paper on this. The research is, I mean, we don't have 10,000 data points on it yet because we just released it like 4 weeks ago, but I think that we will have that data soon. The average self-awareness score is below 70%.
It's not surprising.
Yeah, I want to aggregate it by age, so we just have to cut that data a bunch of different ways.
The third kind of bucket that you say has to be in place for you to really pursue your purpose is the economic bucket, which I think a lot of people don't think of. They're like, oh, here's my values, here's my attributes.
Right.
But if you have to support your family or live in a place that's really expensive, how do you make sure that all three can work together?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work of Becoming You. I mean, the third bucket is your economically viable interests. I mean, I want you doing work, I want everyone doing work that's interesting or calls them intellectually or emotionally, but also is growing, because I want people to have thriving lives and careers. So there's a bunch of different exercises to help you figure out. Now look, of all the data that we gather in Becoming You, this is the one that people usually come into the room knowing. Okay, most people are not very clear on their values. They're somewhere along the way on their aptitudes. They have a sense of them. Economically viable interests, people kind of present saying, it has to be in the life sciences. I'm really into children. I really want to be in, I just love, I mean, I've had people say to me, look, I don't care what industry I'm in. I just want to be helping people. So economically viable interests, typically people come in knowing. But I certainly have people who come in and they're like, I call it the cowbell syndrome, because they want to do two completely opposite things. And this is named for a student who said to me, Professor Welch, I really, really want to be with animals. I grew up on a farm. I want to be a vet. Maybe I should just do that. But also, I dream of ringing the bell on the NASDAQ when my tech company goes public. And I'm like, which one is it? And he said, both. And so that, I called it the cowbell syndrome for that. And other times people present and they say, I just have no idea what interests me. And to me, there's a bunch of different reasons for that. Sometimes that's burnout. Sometimes that's anxiety. Sometimes that's depression. Sometimes that's denial, because what's calling you is up against expectations. I had a student who, when she did her Becoming You whole process, and she did the whole workbook and everything like that, she kept on coming. Her purpose, it sort of shows up, okay? You go through a whole process and then it pops. And she was like, wait, why does this keep saying Roomba teacher? And I was like, because that's your purpose. And she was like, no, it can't be that. I said, but you've done it 4 times, okay? It's Roomba teacher. And she said, that just can't be, because, and I said, why can't it be? And she said, because I'm an MBA. And I said, like, lovingly, is there legislation that prevents you from being a Roomba teacher? And she said, I just can't tell my parents this. And guess what she's doing? She's a consultant. And I hope that she's very happy taking Roomba 12 times a week. I mean, she just was called to it, and she'll get there eventually. She will. I'll hear from her in around 6 years.
Okay, we have one last question, and it is from the audience, and you have to answer it quick.
Okay.
What do you hope people will be able to do more of after reading the book?
Flourish. Just feel exquisitely alive. People say to me, how do I know I'm living my purpose? And I say, it's like being in love. You know it, you want to levitate. I mean, you feel exquisitely alive. And I didn't get it till I was in my 60s. I mean, I did stuff that I liked and loved, but it wasn't my purpose. And then one day I was in class, and a student was asking me a question, and I thought, why do I feel like I'm levitating? I mean, I was so happy to be teaching this material. And so that's what I hope people get, because it's very good. And then you share it. Like, you don't keep that inside, and it starts this virtuous circle. We need more of that in the world of people sharing their happiness and their joy, and I think that's what it goes round and round.
Okay, and I have to ask, even though I said that was the last question, are you fully actualized now?
I think I'm pretty close. It's not like bad things. I have grief that will never go away, right? So there's that, and stuff happens. But I would say that I am a good advertisement. Like, it's like Hair Club for Men. I'm also a customer. I mean, I believe in it because it worked for me.
All right, everyone, buy the book. It is for sale, and Suzy's kind enough to stick around and sign copies for everyone today. Thank you.